Okay, the studio is live now, and over to you.
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me. Thanks also to Westcon Comstore for inviting me to talk at, and I'm going to have to start again because I've already forgotten the name of the event.
No problem. Imagine
Right.
Middle East.
Second and last take. Imagine Middle East. Okay, good to go. All right, apologies.
Perfect.
Ready to go?
Over to you.
Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining me today. Thanks also to Westcon Comstore for inviting me to talk today at Imagine Middle East. So my name is David Warburton. I'm from the F5 Labs Threat Research Group, part of F5. And today I wanted to talk to you about one of the long-standing research series that we have called the Application Protection Reports. This one is a new updated version that we have released and published on our website, f5labs.com. And we've titled this presentation, New Architectures, Old Attacks. And the reason for it is what we're trying to do in this series of reports is to try and get away from the kind of the media hype and the cycle of very fantastic and sometimes very impressive, very academic and sometimes theoretical kind of attacks that can hit the news, whether it be breaking some new cryptographic protocol or some theoretical attack which could be conducted by a potentially huge and well-funded nation state. What we're looking at in building these reports is trying to determine what are the most common and frequent types of attacks that result in actual breaches hitting both very large and small companies across the world. As I said, this is a research series. This is the third publication of this report. It's been going on for a couple of years now. And one of the main ways that we get our data to analyze is from the US State Attorney General offices. And the reason we do this is because although it's focused on the US, it provides a fairly consistent view of breaches. Now, not every single breach notification letter will contain very detailed information about how a breach was caused or the results. But generally speaking, they give us a pretty good indication of how attackers got in, how they stole data, how they used it, what was compromised. Now, a few years ago, when we started this report, this research series, we had just over 760 cases that we were able to go through, and 87% of those had a good enough explanation in the letter that allowed us to determine the root cause of the breach. Some of them were very vague. Some of them give kind of somewhat overlapping reasons. But what's unique, well, what's certainly true about all of them is we can't automate this process. In every single case, a security expert has had to go through and read these breach notifications and determine by hand, if you like, what was actually at the root cause. This isn't something that we've been able to accurately automate because it's English language and it can be very kind of fluid and loose in the way that it's used. Now, last year's data, the number of cases went up fairly significantly. A slightly lower percentage had good and clear explanations in the letter as to what caused the breaches, but it still gave us a very good number of very large-scale breaches, which allowed us to do some interesting analysis on the data and find out what were the most common cause of breaches. And what we found over the past few years is a fairly consistent pattern, but the way that we've broken it down and aggregated results is into a number of kind of tiers or types of data breaches. By far the most significant is what we relate to as the access tier or access control related breaches. Now, the access tier or access control is anything really which bridges the gap between a human user and the information system. So it could be something to do with managing passwords or accessing a system using credentials. It can involve things like social engineering, phishing, and other such social engineering kind of attacks. And as you can see from the slides, a really significant amount, now 52% of all breaches, of all incidents that actually resulted in a breach, were down to incidents relating the access tier. The second most common was web-related. Now, these are what you might consider your more typical kind of cyber attacks, where threat actors will actually go and compromise a website by maybe attacking a login form, using an injection attack, or performing some other kind of exploit against that website to go and steal data or compromise it in some other kind of way. We found that malware numbers weren't super clear. We actually think that the number of malware incidents, particularly involving ransomware, should be significantly higher. But again, we're somewhat kind of hindered with a language that's used by breach notification letters. In many cases, the breach notification letters are written by lawyers, or they've been passed through some kind of legal or marketing kind of filter, if you like. So again, they're not always 100% clear. But again, one thing that was very, very clear was that by far the most leading cause of breaches was down to that access control tier. So again, focusing on last year specifically, but now diving into specific industry verticals, we can see that again, access breaches are consistently the most common type of breach method, save one particular vertical, which is retail. And it's interesting, when we think about why this might be, it's fairly clear, because actually for the most data, most personal data or intellectual property that attackers want to get hold of, by far the easiest way of getting to that is not by performing some complex attack at the web tier. It's actually grabbing someone's credentials, maybe through phishing, and logging in through the front door. It raises no alarm bells, and it's far easier to get to the target. Retail, on the other hand, typically what the attacker is after is payment card details. Sometimes it could be bank account numbers, but typically it's credit card, it's debit card numbers, and so on. And so the way they exploit this, the way they actually get to those numbers, is by compromising the website and by stealing the payment card details as the user is entering them in the website, as they're checking out through their online shopping basket. What is really interesting, although only 19% of all incidents were related to web attacks for 2019, by far the #1 type of web attack that we found, particularly for retail, was what we call form jacking. Now, this is a kind of card stealing web injection. Now, in this attack, what happens is the malicious actor will target a victim website, if you like. Now, there's any number of ways of doing this through exploiting vulnerabilities in the website code itself. Very, very commonly over the past few years, particularly with the Magecart group, we saw content management systems and payment card systems being breached. Ultimately, they'll find a way to inject their own code. Now, this code won't deliberately or obviously alter the site in any way. It injects some silent piece of code which essentially aims to clone or copy payment and personal details as they're entered. They can also add additional fields. For example, if they're trying to capture maybe bank account related information, they might ask for things such as mother's maiden name or other security related questions. So it allows them to help, then log into that financial account later on. As I said, these injections are largely invisible to most users. And so a genuine user might then visit the website once it's been compromised with this web injection attack, enter their payment card details to check out, and unbeknownst to both them and the operator of that website, their payment card details have been stolen and siphoned off to an attacker-controlled website. And this is quite often what a user sees. When a user visits a website, we've lovingly created one called Bob Spikes here. We see any number of kind of objects or elements on a screen, but to the end user, to the visitor of a website, they appear as just one, they appear as one website. Everything is essentially looking as if it's been delivered from one place, from the web server through to the client browser. Now, any one of these components might be attacked. Any one of these components could be used to perform this web injection attack to steal payment card detail. And what's particularly difficult or problematic now is not just that we're increasingly using third parties to develop websites for us, but we're increasingly using third parties to host those website components for us. Visiting any number of popular websites these days, you'll find that it's not just one web domain, example.com, that's delivering that website. It's potentially dozens, in some cases hundreds of different web domains and websites that are all sending different elements that make up this overall web page. Whether it's image hosting or analytics or hot linked kind of JavaScript code, all of these things can be fetched from different places all over the web and assembled in real time in the client browser. And what's really challenging from this point of view with this kind of model And this diagram possibly doesn't do a great job of explaining it until you kind of go through each step one by one. But because those widgets, if you like, the analytics engines, the JavaScript code, the images, because they're all sourced from different places over the web, it makes it very difficult to not only control security, but also just gain visibility in terms of these attacks, these form jacking attacks that are happening. An enterprise, a website operator could have a very strong control. They could use a strong web app firewall in front of their website to protect the code that they're delivering. But that will do nothing to protect all the different widgets and analytics platforms and scripts and so on, as I mentioned, being sent from different places all over the web. So we covered a large element of web attacks, but as I mentioned, access-related attacks were by far the most common for breach root causes for the past few years. Again, access attacks can really relate to anything that are related to a user, human interfacing with an operating system, an information system, any kind of computer element at all. And this can include things like brute force attacks. It can include credential stuffing and phishing and many other different kinds of social engineering as well. Last year specifically, the numbers for access-related attacks broke down like this. These are overlapping figures in many cases. Again, because of the language that's used in breach notification letters, they will sometimes be very explicit, sometimes not. 32.8% cited email as the cause. And in one specific example, we can quote the letter went something like this. It said, "We have learned that an unauthorized third party appeared to have gained access to an employee email account, and some of those messages have contained personal information belonging to some customers." Don't always give the reasons or the wherefores and the hows and the whys as to how that email system was compromised. But in the vast majority of cases, it's social engineering, it's phishing that allows the attacker to get access to that email system and steal data. Now, taking some of our own data, so the F5 CERT, the Security Incident and Response Team, part of F5, will help customers protect against both kind of threatened cyber attacks and also ongoing ones. And they see an awful lot of brute force attacks against their customers. Now, brute force attacks are very crude in nature. It's essentially password guessing, if you like. It's trying a large number of different passwords for any one given user account and just cycling through potentially millions of different passwords until they get a successful logon. Here in the graph, we can see a breakdown from last year between the different kinds of customers across the verticals. Finance, as you can see, are particularly heavily hit. 32.3% of all cases that the F5 CERT dealt with regarding brute force were purely down to the financial sector. But brute force attacks should be fairly simple to spot and mitigate. You know, a high number of login attempts for any one user or a high number of login attempts from any one IP address should signal some security control to lock the account down or block that IP address. And for this reason, we've actually seen a growth in what's called credential stuffing attacks. Credential stuffing attacks are very different from brute force. Credential stuffing attacks are using known good username and password combinations that have come from someone else's data breach, whether it be from an email provider that's got breached or a financial services institution. You know, there are now 1 trillion exposed passwords available on the web. And very, very often, most of those have usernames and passwords associated with them. And what will happen in these credential stuffing attacks is that the threat actors will use bots. They'll use some kind of automated system. Very frequently, those bots will be using hundreds or thousands of different IP addresses. So the attack's coming from, you know, lots and lots of different locations around the world. And they'll try lots and lots of different targets, from healthcare to financial and retail. And they'll just keep logging in with one username and password combination after another until they get a successful logon. And they know, with the sheer number of users and stolen credentials on their side, they will get a match. And they will get a match, they'll get a successful login, because so many people reuse so many people reuse the same password from site to site. Figures differ. One of the ones we see frequently is about 75% of people use passwords across multiple sites. And actually, from just speaking anecdotally, I think that number is far, far higher. Now, phishing is also a growing problem. We've actually just finishing work on our new phishing and fraud report that will be published on f5labs.com shortly. And so the work I've been doing as part of that report showed that we've had a 15% year-on-year increase in phishing incidents that we've seen within the F5 Security Operations Center. And particularly interestingly, over the past 10 months or so, during this period of lockdown, during this period of people working from home increasingly, there have been really significant jumps in phishing attacks. At points, the peak of lockdown for many people, a growth of over 220% of phishing-related attacks that have come out. And this is being echoed all over the world, from Europol citing that social engineering is a growing threat. The Verizon data breach incident report has mentioned recently that the use of malware and advanced exploits has gone down because attackers are relying so much now on phishing and other social engineering related attacks because they are simply so successful. And attackers, phishers, fraudsters are adapting, and they're changing to different technologies as well. One of the newer and more problematic types of phishing is called consent phishing. Traditionally, phishing looks to trick users into visiting a website and entering their credentials. But as we're moving more to hosted systems with maybe federated access, so for example, if I use Office 365, I'm not necessarily logging in with a password that Office 365 owns and manages. In many cases, I will authenticate to my corporate system, and my corporate system will then basically send a secure token logging me into Office 365. And so what we've seen is a shift now in many, many new cases of phishing using this consent phishing. This is one example that occurred over the pandemic lockdown period, where an attachment comes through, it's encoded, which makes it difficult for a lot of security controls to pick up on malicious code actually in the document. But when the user opened this malicious HTML page, the web browser automatically decodes it, follows the redirect that's implied in the HTML code, and will take a user through to a website which then asks for authorization. It doesn't ask for the password to Office 365. It asks the user to grant permission for this app to access their account. And you've probably seen a screen similar to this. If you've ever downloaded a new app for your mobile, or maybe got a new email app for your Windows or Mac desktop computer, increasingly, particularly if you're hosting your email in Google or Office 365, again, you won't be presenting credentials. You'll just simply be giving it permission to access your account. And the problem with this is that quite often these permissions are very overreaching and they last indefinitely. So once you've agreed for this app to access your account, it can often be long-lasting and have full access to all of your data and all of your systems hosted within that platform. This is one such example that we captured at the start of lockdown. Again, this example, the victim, if you like, what would have been the victim, is tricked into following this link, which follows a few redirects. Now, in this case, the user is actually authenticating to Microsoft, but the app itself is then being given permission to access their account. And once things are hosted in Office 365, quite often if an attacker gets access to that account, it's not just email, it's SharePoint, it's documents, potentially finance or HR systems, and many, many more things that can be obtained as well. Now, talking about trends, one of the other big trends that we've seen over the past couple of years are attacks related to APIs, or application programming interfaces. These are the kind of non-human ways of interacting with applications. Increasingly, it's mobile apps that will be using an API to access data that's stored behind a website, essentially. And so apps have to use these APIs, and they're usually very often meshed and interrelated. Now, we're not picking on the ELK stack here, we're just using them as an example. But here, for example, any element of the Elasticsearch database and platform can be accessed via separate APIs. Some of them are accessed by accessing another API first. But we've seen a particularly growing and worrying trend about the number of breaches that are related to API failures. Now, what's interesting is, just like the vulnerabilities that have affected websites decades ago, we see those same kind of problems affecting APIs now. It's kind of almost like we haven't quite learnt our lesson. Anytime a new protocol or new method of delivering an app comes along, it's the same old problems that are affecting us. So the vast majority of all of these breaches, which you're seeing on the time graph here now, are almost all exclusively to do with a lack of authentication or poor authentication. They're to do with a lack of control, so authorization. So yes, you've been authenticated, but do you really have access to access this particular piece of data now that you've been authenticated? But also injection attacks, because the same kind of vulnerabilities which affected websites for so many years still affect APIs. Injection being one of the most common ones. Injecting malicious code into a field via an API can still expose data in the same way that attacking a website can do. And I think what's crucial here is that we don't often realize which APIs are exposed to the public over the internet, essentially. We assume that users will interact and interface with our website the way that we want them to, through the web user interface or using the mobile app. But of course, if these APIs have been inadvertently exposed to the web and don't have the proper controls on them, then attackers will find them and they'll exploit them directly, not going through the regular channels. One particular example that was that hit the news a couple of years ago now was a very, very large financial institution that hosted their app in the cloud. And this actually was a combination of vulnerable web code, which then connected through to an internal private API within the Amazon Web Services environment. And the attacker was basically able to exfiltrate data from a private S3 bucket because of not necessarily the vulnerability of the API itself, but the way in which the vulnerable app then interfaced with the API. So it's really, really important, and I think very interesting to kind of look at the way we're starting to deploy applications differently now in cloud environments, and the way in which these interactions occur, we don't necessarily have visibility over, because that's the way cloud is designed, that someone else manages it for us. But again, any small kind of crack in the armor, any small piece of vulnerability can have very unintended consequences. I mentioned mobile briefly. These are effectively being hit in very much the same way. We, as users, look at our mobile phone, look at the app with shiny buttons and interfaces, and that's our view of the world. Attackers see it very differently. They look at the traffic passing between this mobile app and the backend server. And again, most of these web apps have been delivered via APIs. And again, a lot of them are vulnerable to the same kind of vulnerabilities, whether it's injection or denial of service, brute force even, that we've had on websites for a very, very long time. So in terms of recommendations, it's nothing crazy, because ultimately, as I said, these are very consistent kinds of problems to do with access and web breaches that we've had for years and years, in many cases for decades. So a lot of it comes down to just doing the basics. It's having, particularly I would say when it comes to APIs, having an inventory and good asset management program so that you know exactly what endpoints are exposed to the web, how they're controlled, and ultimately who owns them, who owns the security policies for all those APIs and those endpoints. But it's also things like multi-factor and web app firewalling. Web app firewalling will go so far in terms of protecting your web app, but you also need to understand its limitations. What can't it do? Ultimately, it won't protect you against vulnerable third-party widgets which your website might be using. And multi-factor and anti-bot solutions will also go a very, very long way to help protect your site and your customers against phishing and other social engineering attacks. Protecting APIs for the mobile login is very important. Again, I think it's not just APIs themselves, it's any new protocol that comes along, whether it's HTTP2 or WebSockets, anything that's like newer, the developers are able to pick up and use because it provides so much more functionality, makes it then very difficult to apply existing security controls because they haven't always kind of caught up to that new protocol and are able to apply the same kind of security controls to them. So really be aware of what APIs are in use, how they're being made public, what protocol are being used, and whether the same kind of security policies can be applied to them. phishing training hopefully goes without saying. What is possibly interesting is the effect in which it has. It will never completely reduce and remove the threat of phishing altogether, but it can significantly reduce the likelihood of a successful phishing attack affecting your customers. Your staff members. That's it from me. I just want to thank again Westcon Comstore for inviting me here to talk at Imagine Middle East. Thanks very much for your time. If you would like any more information, please visit F5 Labs. We'd love you to read the rest of our research series and get involved, and also just give us feedback in terms of what you're seeing from a security point of view. We have a quiz coming up on today's presentation, so look forward to that. And thanks very much again for your time.
Perfect. Wow. That was actually really...
I don't know how I did the time, because I know we had a false start. How much did we go significantly
you were
over?
spot on. Spot on. 25 minutes down to the T.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
We had a 30-second delay in the beginning, give or take a few seconds.
Okay.
With the restarts, but other than that, I mean, you ended pretty much spot on 25.
Cool. I kind of lost it a bit at the end. Did I mention the quiz and close off properly?
Yes, I think you did. Yes.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah, I think your presentation was firstly very interesting, and secondly, it was very nice and smooth and went through very, very nice.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Fantastic. So Jay, if you can just or Trina, if you can just explain the little teaser video that you guys want to do here, at the end now.
Yes, Alex. Sorry, I got back. Dave, I just put a small note on the side for the teaser video. So you just have to a small one, inviting the audience, inviting the partners. We're gonna use this for social media. So you just have to start. Hi, I am Dave. Your designation from F5. Join me at the Imagine Middle East to explore. Then you mention your topic that you just have the presentation with.
Okay. Fine. I mean, so we're looking for what, like 10 seconds?
Yeah, looking forward to join me at the event.
Sure.
Something like that, or
just a quick 10, 20-second thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're still recording? Still want me to just go for it now?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to pop everybody out, and then I'm going to pop you full screen.
Okay.
And over to you.
Okay. Hi, I'm David Warburton with F5 Labs. No, I'm going to go again, sorry. Hi, I'm David Warburton with F5 Labs. Join me at Imagine Middle East, where I'm going to take you through the latest application protection report from the researchers at F5 Labs. And no, can I go again?
Of course.
Oh, these things. I normally do about 100 takes of these. Hopefully I'll be a bit quicker today.
No worries.
Okay.
Cool. Over to you.
Hi, I'm David Warburton with F5 Labs. Join me at Imagine Middle East, where I'm going to take you through the latest application protection report from the F5 Labs research team and explore how attackers are conducting successful breaches of data from the past few years.
Perfect. I think that went really well.
Okay.
Nice.
That's
Dave,
good.
you
That's
happy?
good. Yeah, that's good and smooth. Yes, yes, Alex. Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no problem. Cool.
Appreciate it, yeah.
Yeah, so everything good? All done?
Everything's perfect.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming
Great.
through.
Thank you very much, David, for your time today. Really appreciate your support.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Hope it all goes well. And so I think you answered my question already. I don't need to be online for the live rebroadcast, but I can catch up.
Yes, David. As I mentioned, we don't have a live Q&A session, and even for our virtual booths, we'll have offline chat available. So, okay, absolutely fine.
Brilliant. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Bye.
So,
Awesome.
Yes, we were spot on time. That's the best part.
Yes, so that's for today for all the recordings. Anything else, guys, for the studio? Srinath?
I think we're good. Anything from your side, Snable?
Sorry, Jay, can you say that again? Your voice.
No, I was just asking if you have anything for the studio. Like you have to say something to Alex and the team.
No, Alex, I've written an email to Mike already again. I mean, the same thing that I spoke to you about earlier. If he can just send us the
Yes.
links. And I sent him an email just now a while back, even to share the teaser videos we took today. So yeah.
We'll see what the editing team schedule is for today, and we'll try and get them out as soon as possible, obviously. And Mike is currently in meetings, as far as I'm aware, and then he's going to be jumping into a
No
meeting. I
problem.
think it's now, and the next 15 minutes with Tushar actually as well. So
Okay.
I'll probably address it with him as soon as I see him again.
Okay,
Alright.
cool.
Okay, cool.
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you
and
so
see
much.
you again tomorrow.
I think that's it for today. This was the last recording for today.
Yes, that's it for today.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. All right, thanks.
Tomorrow,
Bye.
okay.
Perfect.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.